When people talk about the early years of the United States, the names that usually rise to the top are George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. John Adams often stands in the middle, not forgotten but not given the same attention either. Yet he played a major role in the Revolution, helped shape the earliest American laws, and served as the nation's second president. His time in office lasted only one term, and this has led many to wonder why a man so loyal to his country, and so central to its founding, failed to win a second election. This question becomes even more interesting when you remember how uncommon it was at the time for a president to serve just one term. Washington had served two. Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and others who came later also served two. Adams was the exception at a time when there were no term limits. A president could stay in office as long as voters supported him. So the fact that Adams left after only 4 years tells us that something unusual was happening in American politics. The goal of this video is to look closely at the events, choices, rivalries, and pressures that shaped John Adams's presidency. When we do that, we find a story that is not simple or straightforward. It is a story filled with tension at home and abroad. It is a story of clashing personalities, new political parties, and a nation still deciding what kind of government it wanted. It is also a story of a leader who valued duty and principle but struggled with popularity in a system where public support was becoming more important. Before we dive into the key events, it helps to picture the United States as it looked in the late 1700s. This was a young country still trying to stand on its own. The government was new. The Constitution had been in place for less than a decade. Many Americans were still unsure about how much power the president should hold. The first political parties were forming, even though many of the founders disliked the idea of factions. Newspapers were growing more partisan and often published personal attacks. Foreign nations, especially France and Britain, were watching each move the United States made, ready to influence or pressure the young country whenever possible. In the middle of all this stood John Adams. He had served as George Washington's vice president, though the role came with little influence at the time. Adams was known for his intelligence, his honesty, and his deep belief in the rule of law. But he was also known for being blunt, stubborn, and sometimes hard to work with. He spoke his mind even when it cost him support. He did not charm voters or political leaders the way others did. These traits helped him when he fought for independence, but they worked against him in the fast-changing world of national politics. When Adams took office in 1797, the country faced both opportunity and danger. The United States was growing in size and confidence, but foreign threats were real. France, once an ally during the Revolution, was now suspicious and sometimes hostile. Britain, America's old rival, continued to influence trade and push its interests. Political divisions at home grew deeper as Americans argued about whether to support France or Britain and what kind of future the Republic should have. Adams stepped into the presidency at a moment when small decisions could quickly become national crises. One of the central questions of Adams's presidency was how to respond to these pressures while keeping the country stable. His choices would soon lead to major disputes with both his opponents and members of his own party. He would face criticism not just from the public, but from powerful figures in his own political circle. Some saw him as too cautious. Others saw him as too forceful. Many felt that his leadership style did not fit the intense moment the nation was facing. As we explore this topic in depth, we will look at the political landscape Adams inherited, the internal conflicts he faced, the foreign challenges that shaped his decisions, and the laws he supported that turned many voters against him. We will study his leadership style, the historic election of 1800, and the reasons his opponents were able to unite against him so effectively. Each of these elements played a part in his loss, and each reveals something important about the early American Republic. This video does not aim to judge Adams as simply a success or failure. Instead, it aims to understand why a man who cared deeply about his country struggled to keep the support he needed. His presidency offers a clear window into the birth of American politics. It shows how fragile the new government was and how easily strong disagreements could split leaders apart. It also shows that being a founder or a respected patriot did not guarantee success once the country moved from revolution to government. John Adams's story is not just the story of one man. It is the story of a nation discovering how to elect leaders, how to disagree on policy, and how to balance security with liberty. It is a story filled with lessons, many of which still feel relevant today. The rise and fall of Adams's presidency helps us understand the costs of political division, the dangers of mistrust between leaders, and the challenge of leading a country that had not yet decided what it wanted to become. As a boy, Adams loved the outdoors and often talked about how he wanted to become a farmer like his father. He enjoyed fishing, hunting, and walking through the fields around his home. But his father saw his potential and insisted that he get an education. Adams entered Harvard College at the age of 15. At first, he found the strict academic life difficult, but he soon discovered a love for reading, writing, and debate. He graduated in 1755, ranking near the top of his class. After Harvard, Adams worked briefly as a schoolteacher, though he did not enjoy it. He soon turned to the law. He studied under a well-known lawyer in Worcester and began building his career. The legal profession suited him. He was thorough, hard-working, and confident in front of a judge. He saw law as a way to serve the public and protect individual rights. Over the years, he gained a reputation for honesty and careful reasoning. One early event that shaped Adams's public image came in 1770, after the Boston Massacre. British soldiers had fired into a crowd of colonists, killing 5 people. The incident caused outrage throughout the colonies. Many wanted the soldiers punished without trial. Adams believed that everyone deserved a fair defense, even those accused of violent acts. He agreed to represent the soldiers in court, even though he knew it could hurt his popularity. He argued that the law must rise above anger and fear. His defense helped acquit most of the soldiers. This decision earned him respect from some and criticism from others, but it showed the kind of person he was. He placed principle above personal gain. By the early 1770s, tensions between the colonies and Britain were growing. Adams became more involved in public affairs. He wrote essays supporting colonial rights and calling for resistance against unfair British taxes and policies. His writing was clear and direct, and it helped shape public opinion. People began to see him not just as a lawyer but as a leader with a deep understanding of politics and liberty. In 1774, Adams was chosen as a delegate to the First Continental Congress. This was the first major gathering of colonial leaders to discuss how to respond to British rule. Adams played an active role. He argued that the colonies should organize, prepare for possible conflict, and defend their rights. His ideas were bold for the time, and they helped move the discussion toward unity. When the Second Continental Congress met in 1775, the situation had grown more serious. Fighting had already begun in Massachusetts at Lexington and Concord. Adams rose quickly as one of the strongest voices for independence. He believed that the colonies could not return to life under British control. He nominated George Washington to command the Continental Army and supported the creation of a national government to guide the war effort. Adams was also central in the push for the Declaration of Independence. He worked closely with Thomas Jefferson and other members of the drafting committee. Jefferson wrote most of the document, but Adams helped shape its ideas and fought hard for its approval. When the Congress finally voted for independence on July 2, 1776, Adams wrote that the day would be remembered as one of the greatest in American history. During the war, Adams served on more than 90 committees. He worked on military planning, foreign affairs, and economic policy. His workload was heavy, and he was away from his family for long periods. His wife, Abigail Adams, played a major role in supporting him. Their letters show a strong partnership built on trust, advice, and respect. Abigail often gave him insight into public opinion in Massachusetts, and he valued her thoughts. As the war continued, Adams was sent to Europe to seek support for the American cause. His first mission, in 1777, was to France. The French were already helping the United States, but Adams struggled to work with the French diplomats. He had a direct style that sometimes clashed with European customs. Though this mission was difficult, it prepared him for later diplomatic roles. In 1780, Adams was sent again to Europe, this time to the Netherlands. His goal was to secure loans for the United States. At first, the Dutch leaders were not interested. They saw the young republic as risky and unstable. Adams worked patiently, meeting with merchants, explaining American independence, and building connections. After months of hard work, he succeeded. The Dutch recognized American independence and provided loans that helped support the war effort. This was one of Adams's greatest diplomatic achievements. After the war, Adams stayed in Europe for several years. He helped negotiate the Treaty of Paris, which officially ended the conflict with Britain. He later served as the first American minister to the Court of St. James in London. This was a challenging post, since the United States and Britain were still adjusting to peace. Adams often felt isolated, but he worked to improve relations and encourage respect for the new nation. Finally, Adams returned home in 1788. The new Constitution had been approved, and the country was preparing for its first national elections. He supported the new government, believing it created a stronger and more stable republic. George Washington was the clear choice for president, and Adams was widely seen as the leading candidate for vice president. He won the role by a large margin. Serving as vice president was not easy for Adams. The position had no real duties at the time. Washington did not rely on him for advice, and the Senate, which he presided over, often ignored his suggestions. Adams wrote that the vice presidency was the most insignificant office ever invented. Still, he took it seriously and tried to bring order and structure to the Senate's debates. His ideas were not always welcomed, especially when they touched on proper titles and ceremonial rules. Many senators thought he cared too much about formality. During Washington's presidency, Adams watched as political divisions deepened. Two main groups formed. Federalists supported a stronger national government. Democratic Republicans favored more power for the states. Adams agreed more often with the Federalists but tried to keep his independence. When Washington announced he would not seek a third term, Adams prepared for the election of 1796. He did not campaign in the modern sense. Candidates at that time were expected to stay quiet and let their supporters lead the effort. Adams trusted that his long years of service would give him enough support. The election of 1796 was the first real contest for the presidency. Adams faced Thomas Jefferson, who represented the growing Democratic-Republican movement. The vote was close. Adams won by just 3 electoral votes. Under the rules of the time, the runner-up became vice president. This meant that Adams and Jefferson, who disagreed on almost everything, would now lead the country together. It was an awkward arrangement and an early sign of the political conflict that lay ahead. When Adams took the oath of office in March 1797, he brought with him decades of service, diplomatic experience, and a strong belief in the new nation. But he also carried heavy challenges. He faced a divided government, a tense world, and a job that demanded both political skill and steady judgment. The next 4 years would test every part of his character. They would also show why he became the first American president to serve only 1 term. When John Adams entered the presidential election of 1796, the United States was still a young republic struggling to find stable ground. The Constitution had been in effect for less than 10 years. The government was new, the political culture was unsettled, and the rules of presidential elections were still taking shape. Many of the founders had hoped that political parties would never take root in the country. They believed that parties would divide the people and weaken the Union. But by the mid-1790s, parties were forming whether anyone liked it or not. The political world Adams stepped into was tense, unpredictable, and often hostile. Partisanship was rising quickly. Newspapers attacked leaders with harsh language. Foreign events stirred fear and suspicion. People argued passionately about the future of the republic. In this atmosphere, the election of 1796 became one of the most important early tests of the American political system. To understand why Adams became America's first one-term president, it is important to consider the world he faced at the start of his term. The political landscape of 1796 shaped every challenge he would confront, as well as the expectations voters had and the pressures placed on his decisions. This period bridged the flexible leadership of George Washington and the rise of sharply defined party politics. Political parties were not mentioned in the Constitution, and many founders thought they were dangerous, believing they would lead to suspicion and rivalry. Nevertheless, disagreements developed and soon became organized, producing two main political groups with distinct visions for the country. The Federalists, led by Alexander Hamilton, though Adams was the highest-ranking elected Federalist, supported a strong national government, a stable financial system, and closer ties with Britain, favoring a commercial economy and strong federal authority. They saw themselves as protectors of stability, believing democracy needed limits and structure, and found their main support in New England among merchants, bankers, and professionals. The Democratic Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, favored limited federal power and stronger state authority, supported France over Britain, and envisioned a republic of small farmers and independent citizens. They feared the Federalists were creating a government favoring the wealthy and argued that liberty depended on keeping power close to the people. These groups did not merely disagree, they mistrusted each other and often accused each other of threatening the nation, creating a political climate that was emotional, unpredictable, and often unfair. Foreign affairs further complicated the political scene. The French Revolution, which began in 1789, grew increasingly violent by the mid-1790s. Some Americans supported it as a continuation of the fight for liberty, while others were horrified by the executions and feared the spread of unrest. Britain remained a powerful presence, controlling the seas and often interfering with American trade, with Federalists seeing Britain as vital for stability and Democratic Republicans viewing it as a threat to independence. These international pressures intensified domestic conflicts, as each party accused the other of being too loyal to foreign powers. George Washington's presidency also shaped the world Adams inherited. Washington had tried to remain above party divisions but became a target of criticism during his second term. When he declined a third term, the country faced its first presidential election without a unifying leader. Washington left behind a cabinet divided along party lines, with Hamilton still influential among Federalists and Jefferson having resigned due to disagreements, heightening political tension. Adams inherited this divided environment, with little control over officials loyal to Hamilton, which would become a major challenge for his presidency. The election system of 1796 differed from today, as electors cast 2 votes for president, with the runner-up becoming vice president. This meant political rivals could end up in the executive branch together, requiring careful planning and encouraging secret strategies, regional maneuvering, and mistrust among allies. John Adams, a Federalist with years of public service and a reputation for honesty, relied on his record rather than direct campaigning, while Thomas Jefferson, a Democratic Republican, represented a different vision for the country, emphasizing states' rights and democratic principles, with strong support in the South and West. Newspapers, openly partisan at the time, heavily influenced public opinion, attacking candidates personally and amplifying tension. Adams was sometimes portrayed as cold and monarch-like, while Jefferson was accused of being too friendly with France and radical. The election was close. Adams received 71 electoral votes, Jefferson 68, resulting in a president and vice president from opposing parties, each with different visions and long-standing mistrust. Adams entered office aware of his narrow victory and that Jefferson's supporters would challenge him at every turn. His own party was divided, with moderates supporting him and hardliners following Hamilton, while the Democratic Republicans opposed nearly every policy he proposed. Foreign affairs remained tense and unpredictable, and public trust was limited. He assumed the presidency at a time when unity was fragile, and his term would be shaped by these tensions, illustrating the difficulty of leading a nation struggling to define its identity. When John Adams entered the presidency in March 1797, he stepped into a situation that was already tense and uneven. The country was still young, still forming its identity, and still unsure about how to balance stability with freedom. Political divisions were sharper than ever. Foreign powers were pushing and pulling the United States in different directions. The public was divided in its loyalties and fears. All of this placed Adams at the center of a political storm the moment he took the oath of office. The most immediate challenge he faced was the split within his own party. The Federalists were not unified. They shared broad goals, such as maintaining order and supporting a strong national government, but they disagreed about how to reach those goals. Some wanted a cautious approach that avoided unnecessary conflict. Others favored a more forceful path, including building up the military and standing firm against France. Adams was somewhere in the middle, which placed him under pressure from both sides. Alexander Hamilton was still a powerful figure in the Federalist Party despite no longer holding office. He influenced many cabinet members and used his influence to shape the party's direction. Hamilton had strong opinions on foreign policy, finance, and military strength. He believed the United States should be firm against France and should build a large standing army. Adams did not always agree with him, and this difference would grow into a major source of tension. Many members of Adams's cabinet were loyal to Hamilton rather than to Adams. This problem began under Washington, who had appointed them and trusted their abilities. Adams kept them in place when he took office, expecting that they would respect the new president. But several of them communicated privately with Hamilton, sharing inside information and seeking his guidance on decisions. Adams did not know the full extent of this behavior at first, but he sensed that he did not have full control of his own administration. This division within the Federalist Party weakened Adams's leadership from the beginning. It meant that he had to balance the expectations of a party that did not speak with one voice. It also meant that his decisions would often be challenged, not only by his opponents but by members of his own political camp. At the same time, Adams faced a major foreign policy crisis. Relations with France had grown worse during Washington's second term. The United States had signed a treaty with Britain known as the Jay Treaty, which tried to resolve ongoing trade disputes. France saw the treaty as a betrayal. The French government believed the United States was siding with Britain, its old enemy. In response, France began seizing American ships and interfering with American trade. This placed enormous pressure on Adams as he entered office. Adams wanted to avoid a full-scale war. He believed the United States was too young and too financially fragile to fight a major European power. Still, he knew he could not ignore France's actions. He decided to send a diplomatic team to negotiate with the French government. This group included Charles Pinckney, John Marshall, and Elbridge Gerry. Adams hoped that diplomacy would calm tensions and prevent further conflict. What happened next became one of the most famous episodes of his presidency. When the American diplomats arrived in France, they were met not by official representatives, but by intermediaries who demanded large payments before formal talks could begin. These intermediaries, later labeled X, Y, and Z in American reports, hinted that the diplomats should pay a bribe and provide a loan to the French government. Only then would negotiations begin. The American delegation refused. They returned home and reported the incident to Adams. Adams sent the documents to Congress, but he removed the names of the French intermediaries, replacing them with letters to avoid further diplomatic harm. When Congress released the papers to the public, outrage spread through the country. Many Americans were furious that France had tried to force bribes from U.S. officials. The event became known as the XYZ affair. Public anger pushed the United States closer to conflict. Anti-French feeling grew, and Federalists called for strong action. Many demanded that Adams build up the army, strengthen the navy, and prepare for war. Democratic Republicans, who had long supported France, were placed in a difficult position. They tried to downplay the event or blame the Federalists for provoking France. This weakened their credibility for a time. The XYZ affair placed Adams in a difficult spot. On one hand, he needed to defend American honor and security. On the other hand, he still believed that a full war with France would be disastrous. He decided to strengthen the navy and make defensive preparations, but he resisted calls for a formal declaration of war. This approach pleased almost no one. Federalist hardliners said he was too weak. Democratic Republicans said he was provoking unnecessary conflict. Adams found himself stuck between two camps that demanded opposite actions. As tensions grew, Congress authorized the creation of a provisional army. Hamilton was named Inspector General, which effectively gave him significant control over the military. Adams, who believed Hamilton's influence was already too strong, felt uneasy about this. Still, he tried to keep the government functioning and prevent the situation from spiraling out of control. During this period, the United States entered what historians call the Quasi-War, an undeclared naval conflict with France. American ships and French ships clashed in the Caribbean and along Atlantic trade routes. Though no official war was declared, the conflict added strain to Adams's presidency. It fueled partisan arguments and made diplomacy more difficult. Inside the government, Adams faced a cabinet that often acted independently of him. Outside the government, he faced a public divided by loyalty to parties and fear of foreign influence. The pressure was constant, and every decision he made was judged by supporters and critics alike. By the end of 1798, Adams was caught between a party he could not fully control and a foreign threat that could not be ignored. The years ahead would bring even more controversy, especially with the passage of the Alien and Sedition Acts and the final breakdown of unity within the Federalist ranks. These conflicts would shape the last half of his presidency and set the stage for the election of 1800. As tensions with France grew and the Quasi-War unfolded at sea, pressure mounted inside the United States. This period pushed Adams into a series of decisions that would shape the public's view of his presidency. Many of these decisions were influenced not only by foreign threats but by the growing hostility between political parties at home. One of the biggest domestic controversies of Adams's term involved the Alien and Sedition Acts, a set of laws that some considered necessary for national security and others considered a direct attack on American freedom. To understand why these laws were passed, it helps to look at the fear spreading across the country. The French Revolution, once admired, had become violent and unpredictable. European nations were at war. American leaders worried that foreign agents could be stirring unrest in the United States. Many Federalists believed that immigrant communities might be vulnerable to French influence, especially because some newcomers supported the Democratic Republicans. Newspapers added to the fear by publishing rumors about foreign plots or secret alliances. Federalist leaders in Congress believed the moment called for stronger internal controls. They argued that the United States needed to protect itself from radical ideas, foreign interference, and potential uprisings. Adams agreed that some action was necessary, but he did not write the laws and did not push for them as strongly as others. The Federalist majority, however, saw an opportunity to weaken their political rivals while claiming that they were protecting the country. The Alien and Sedition Acts were actually 4 separate laws. Each one had its own purpose, and together they expanded federal power in ways that were unusual for the time. The first 2 laws, the Naturalization Act and the Alien Friends Act, focused on immigrants. The Naturalization Act extended the residency requirement for citizenship from 5 years to 14 years. Many newcomers tended to support Jefferson's Democratic Republicans, so this change slowed their political influence. The Alien Friends Act gave the president the power to expel foreign nationals he believed were dangerous to national security, even if there was no proof of wrongdoing. The third law, the Alien Enemies Act, allowed the president to detain or deport citizens of a hostile country during wartime. This law was more widely accepted because many nations had similar policies, and it made direct sense during international conflict. It also remains in U.S. law today, though it is rarely used. The fourth law, the Sedition Act, was the most controversial. It made it illegal to publish or speak false, scandalous, or malicious statements against the government or its officials. Federalists argued that this law was needed to prevent misinformation and protect national stability. Critics said it was a clear violation of the First Amendment. In practice, the law targeted Democratic Republican newspapers and speakers. Several editors were arrested or fined, and some were jailed. Adams signed the bills into law, though he privately expressed doubts about some parts. Still, he did not veto them. By doing so, he became closely associated with laws that many Americans saw as an attack on free speech. The Sedition Act, in particular, became a symbol of government overreach. Adams did not personally order the arrests and rarely commented on the cases, but he accepted the political benefits that the Federalists claimed the laws would bring. The response from the Democratic Republicans was sharp. Jefferson and Madison drafted resolutions arguing that states had the right to reject federal laws they believed were unconstitutional. These ideas, known as the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, did not overturn the laws, but they spread the belief that the federal government had gone too far. They also deepened the divide between the two parties. The concept of state resistance would return in later moments of American history, but it had its roots in this conflict. Public reaction to the Alien and Sedition Acts was mixed. Some Americans believed that the laws were necessary to keep the country safe during a dangerous time. Others saw them as a serious threat to liberty. Over time, more people began to question the laws, especially as newspaper editors and political critics were punished. What might have begun as a plan for national security soon became a symbol of political fear and overreach. For Adams, the controversy added to the challenges he already faced. He believed that his firm but cautious approach to the conflict with France would eventually keep the country out of a full war. But the public did not always see the connection between foreign threats and domestic legislation. Instead, many saw the laws as an attempt by the Federalists to silence their rivals and secure power. At the same time, Adams continued to struggle with divisions within his own party. Hamilton and other Federalist leaders wanted an aggressive path, including building a large army and preparing for confrontation with France. They believed military readiness would strengthen the country's position and discourage foreign interference. Adams worried that such a buildup might push the nation closer to war, which he wanted to avoid. He also feared giving Hamilton too much influence over military affairs. Hamilton's supporters held key positions, and they often worked around Adams rather than with him. This created a situation in which the president had to fight for control over his own administration, while political rivals on both sides questioned his leadership. By late 1798 and early 1799, the public mood was shifting again. The Quasi-War continued at sea, but diplomatic changes in France offered new hope. The French government had changed leadership after internal struggles, and the new officials were more open to negotiation. Adams saw an opportunity to reach peace, even though many Federalists believed this was a mistake. They argued that France could not be trusted and that negotiation would make the United States appear weak. Adams ignored the pressure and made a bold decision. He sent a new peace delegation to France. This was a turning point in his presidency, and it brought fresh criticism from Hamiltonian Federalists, who claimed he was acting against the will of the party. But Adams believed that avoiding war was the right path, even if it created political problems. He later wrote that this decision was the proudest moment of his presidency. Still, the effort to reach peace placed Adams at odds with many of his strongest supporters. The party began to split more openly. The conflict between Adams and Hamilton would soon grow into a direct struggle for control of the Federalist message as the election of 1800 approached. As Adams pushed forward with his peace initiative, the split within the Federalist Party became more severe. His decision to send a second diplomatic mission to France surprised many leaders in his own party. Some believed the move was reckless. Others said it betrayed the firm stand the Federalists had taken after the XYZ affair. To Adams, though, it was the only way to protect the country from a costly war that would drain its resources and divide its people even further. The peace mission he authorized reached France in 1799, but the process took time. Meanwhile, political tensions in the United States continued to rise. The Federalists, instead of preparing for the next election with a united front, were becoming more divided. Adams and Hamilton, once part of the same political effort during Washington's presidency, were now openly at odds. Hamilton had strong opinions on domestic and foreign policy. He believed that America should use the conflict with France as a chance to build a strong military and strengthen central authority. Adams believed this approach risked turning the United States into something too close to the European systems it had separated from. He worried that a powerful standing army could be misused or could pull the country into unnecessary conflicts. The disagreement soon turned into a personal clash. Hamilton began to organize Federalist leaders against Adams. He used his influence to shape opinions within Congress and within the cabinet. Adams, who already felt undermined by cabinet members who looked to Hamilton for guidance, eventually decided he could no longer tolerate the situation. One of the most dramatic moments of his presidency came when Adams dismissed his Secretary of State, Timothy Pickering. Pickering had repeatedly opposed Adams's diplomatic approach. He also communicated privately with Hamilton and other party leaders in ways that went against the president's wishes. Adams believed he needed a cabinet that would follow his direction rather than take instructions from someone outside the government. Removing Pickering was a bold step that helped Adams regain control of his administration, but it further angered Hamilton and his allies. The cabinet shakeup did not resolve the party's internal struggles. Hamilton responded by working even harder to influence the upcoming election. He believed that Adams was too unpredictable and that the party needed a more reliable leader. Rather than rallying behind the sitting president, Hamilton planned to push Federalists toward a different candidate. His actions would soon have consequences that neither side could fully control. While political battles raged at home, the peace mission Adams authorized finally made progress. In 1800, the United States and France reached an agreement that ended the Quasi-War. It suspended the old alliance between the two nations and settled disputes about captured ships. The agreement, known as the Convention of 1800, allowed both nations to step away from conflict without losing face. It also prevented the United States from being pulled into the larger wars sweeping Europe. This achievement was significant. It protected American trade, reduced military spending, and lowered the risk of future entanglements. Adams saw it as one of his most important accomplishments, and history has largely agreed. By avoiding war, he kept the young nation stable during a fragile period. He prevented the United States from being forced to choose sides in conflicts it was not ready to face. Still, the political cost was high. Many Federalists felt that Adams had ignored the party's wishes. Hamilton and his supporters believed that the peace agreement weakened the United States. They argued that France could not be trusted and that Adams had turned away from a stronger national defense. Democratic Republicans, meanwhile, welcomed the peace but did not give Adams credit. They argued that he had only taken the peaceful route after being pushed by public opinion. At the same time, the public backlash to the Alien and Sedition Acts continued to grow. Newspaper editors who had been jailed under the Sedition Act became symbols of political resistance. Stories of fines and arrests spread through towns and small communities. Many citizens who had once viewed the laws as necessary began to see them as tools for suppressing dissent. The Democratic Republicans skillfully used these cases to challenge the Federalists. They painted Adams as a leader who had allowed the government to overstep its boundaries. They also claimed that the Federalists wanted to silence anyone who disagreed with them. These arguments spread quickly and found support among people who were uncomfortable with the government's newfound power. Adams was in a difficult position. He had approved the laws, but he had not been the one pushing hardest for their enforcement. Still, the public associated the laws with his presidency. The effort to protect national security had turned into a political liability. It weakened Adams's support among independent voters and strengthened the momentum of his opponents. By 1800, Adams was facing a re-election campaign with a divided party, a damaged public image, and a political landscape that had become harsher than ever. Campaigning during this period looked very different from what Americans know today. Candidates did not give speeches or hold rallies. Instead, newspapers, political clubs, and party leaders shaped public opinion. The Federalists and Democratic Republicans each produced articles, pamphlets, and editorials that attacked the other side's character and motives. Political insults were common. Federalists said Jefferson was unreliable and dangerous. Democratic Republicans claimed Adams wanted to build a monarchy and crush dissent. The intensity of the attacks reflected deep fears about the nation's future. Both sides believed that the country's survival depended on the election's outcome. Adams tried to focus on governing rather than campaigning. He believed that the peace with France spoke for itself and that voters would appreciate the stability he had secured. He also believed that the public would recognize the dangers of Jefferson's ideas. Still, he found little comfort in his own party, which was breaking apart as the election approached. Hamilton made the situation even worse when he published a long letter criticizing Adams. It was meant for private use among Federalists, but it was soon printed and distributed by Democratic Republicans. The letter accused Adams of poor judgment, emotional decision-making, and political inconsistency. Although Hamilton said he would still support Adams over Jefferson, His words caused significant damage. The letter confirmed the public impression that Adams lacked support from his own party. By the time the election took place, Adams was isolated. He had achieved a major diplomatic success, but the political world around him no longer functioned in his favor. The Alien and Sedition Acts had alienated many voters. The conflict with Hamilton had weakened the Federalists. The peace with France pleased some but angered others. Adams faced the election with a broken coalition and an energized opposition. When the votes were counted, he lost. His presidency ended after a single term, and the nation handed leadership to Thomas Jefferson and the Democratic Republicans. Adams's struggles during his presidency had laid the groundwork for the political shift that followed. Many of the same challenges that defined his time in office also shaped the outcome of the election. John Adams's presidency, lasting from 1797 to 1801, was marked by significant achievements and equally significant controversies. Understanding why he became the first American president to serve only one term requires examining both his political decisions and the context in which he governed. Adams faced challenges from within his own party, from the opposition, and from the public. These factors combined to limit his political support and set the stage for his single-term presidency. The Federalist Party, which Adams led, was deeply divided. Unlike today's political parties, early American parties were still forming their identities, and the Federalists included a mix of strong personalities with differing priorities. Alexander Hamilton represented the hardline Federalist faction. He supported a strong national government, an aggressive foreign policy, and military expansion. Adams, however, was more moderate. He valued diplomacy and prudence and feared that a large standing army could threaten the very liberties the nation had fought to protect. Hamilton's influence within the party created a constant tension. Even after Adams became president, key Federalist leaders remained loyal to Hamilton rather than to him. Cabinet members such as Timothy Pickering and other officials often acted independently or in consultation with Hamilton, undermining Adams's authority. This internal conflict weakened Adams's ability to present a unified party front, which became especially damaging during election season. When Adams made decisions that went against Hamilton's preferences, he faced open opposition. The most notable example was Adams's decision to pursue peace with France rather than escalate the Quasi-War into a full conflict. While this move avoided unnecessary bloodshed and safeguarded American commerce, Hamilton viewed it as a betrayal of Federalist principles. The resulting friction created a split that made it difficult for Adams to secure full party support in the 1800 election. The passage of the Alien and Sedition Acts in 1798 was another major factor. These laws, intended to protect national security, were widely perceived as overreaches of federal power. They restricted free speech, made it harder for immigrants to gain citizenship, and allowed the president to deport potentially dangerous foreigners. Adams signed the laws into effect, which tied him politically to their controversial consequences. While Adams did not aggressively enforce the laws, the public associated him with their passage. Many citizens believed the laws violated the principles of liberty central to the American Revolution. Democratic Republicans capitalized on this sentiment, portraying Adams as authoritarian and anti-democratic. Over time, the Alien and Sedition Acts became a symbol of Federalist overreach, and Adams's connection to them damaged his popularity across broad swathes of the electorate. The laws also had regional consequences. Support for the acts was strong in New England, where Federalist influence was highest, but weaker in the South and West. These areas tended to favor Democratic Republican ideals. By aligning with the Alien and Sedition Acts, Adams inadvertently alienated voters in key states, weakening his re-election chances. Foreign affairs were central to Adams's presidency, and his handling of the XYZ affair and the Quasi-War with France played a complex role in his political fortunes. Initially, the XYZ affair provoked national outrage. French intermediaries demanded bribes before formal negotiations could begin, a move that infuriated the American public. Many citizens demanded a strong military response, and some Federalists pushed for a declaration of war. Adams, however, chose a path of caution. He strengthened the Navy, prepared defensive measures, and authorized limited naval engagements, but avoided a full-scale war. This decision reflected his pragmatic approach but angered some Federalists, who wanted aggressive retaliation. At the same time, Democratic Republicans criticized any preparations for conflict as unnecessary and provocative. Adams's middle ground approach left him vulnerable to attacks from both sides, diminishing his political base. While the peace eventually reached with France in 1800 was a major achievement, it came too late to repair the damage done by earlier political divisions. Many Federalists felt betrayed, believing Adams had undermined their agenda. Democratic Republicans, while benefiting from the peace, refused to support him politically, preferring their own candidates. Adams's careful diplomacy, though successful in practical terms, did not translate into lasting political support. Adams's personality and leadership style also contributed to his single-term presidency. Unlike charismatic figures such as Washington or Jefferson, Adams was often seen as rigid, temperamental, and unapproachable. He was deeply principled, valuing duty, honesty, and the public good, but he lacked the political tact to navigate personal rivalries and factionalism effectively. He often clashed with colleagues over what he considered procedural or ethical issues. His insistence on careful debate, formal language, and proper procedure sometimes alienated other politicians who prioritized pragmatism or popularity. These personality traits, which could be seen as strengths in a governance context, made him less appealing to voters seeking a more congenial and politically savvy leader. Adams was also unusually honest and independent for his time. He refused to bend to party pressures when he believed the nation's welfare was at stake, as seen in his decisions regarding France and his handling of Hamilton's criticisms. While admirable from a moral perspective, this independence had a high political cost. By the end of his term, he had alienated powerful allies, including influential Federalists, while failing to secure enough support from the general electorate. The election of 1800 was shaped by these factors. Adams faced Thomas Jefferson, a skilled politician with strong regional support in the South and West. Jefferson's campaign capitalized on widespread dissatisfaction with Federalist policies, the Alien and Sedition Acts, and Adams's handling of the party split. While Adams's supporters tried to highlight his foreign policy successes, the message failed to resonate with enough voters. The Federalist split played a decisive role. Hamilton actively campaigned against Adams within his own party, undermining the president's chances. Some Federalist leaders even attempted to manipulate electoral outcomes by encouraging electors to vote for other Federalist candidates. This intra-party conflict fractured Adams's support at a critical moment, allowing Jefferson to consolidate the opposition and secure victory. The election ended with Jefferson tied with Aaron Burr in the Electoral College, creating a constitutional crisis that the House of Representatives ultimately resolved in Jefferson's favor. Adams received fewer votes and lost the presidency. He became the first American president to serve only a single term, largely because of the combination of party divisions, controversial legislation, political miscalculations, and personal factors that limited his appeal. Beyond the immediate political factors, Adams's loss of support also stemmed from long-term structural and social dynamics in early America. These dynamics included regional differences, the evolving nature of parties, and the rise of public opinion as a force in elections. The United States of the late 1790s was not a politically uniform country. Different regions had distinct economic interests, cultures, and political priorities. New England, the heartland of Federalist power, was economically tied to commerce, shipping, and banking. This region supported strong national policies and was generally loyal to Adams. The Federalists' New England base provided Adams with some security, but it was not enough to carry the entire country. The South and the West leaned toward the Democratic Republicans. These regions valued agriculture, states' rights, and less centralized authority. They viewed Federalist policies, including the Alien and Sedition Acts, as oppressive and a threat to liberty. Adams's moderate approach to diplomacy and governance, while sensible from a national perspective, did not align with the priorities of these regions. Jefferson's appeal in these areas provided a critical electoral advantage that Adams could not overcome. This regional divide highlights how early American elections were influenced not only by policy decisions but by geography and local culture. Adams had support in key areas but failed to secure the broad coalition needed for re-election. Adams's presidency occurred during the first era of organized political parties in the United States. Prior presidents, including Washington, had attempted to remain above partisan conflicts, but Adams inherited a landscape in which party loyalty was rapidly becoming essential. The rise of newspapers, pamphlets, and political clubs intensified partisanship. Leaders and voters began to define themselves strictly by party affiliation. Adams's cautious, independent style did not fit neatly into these emerging partisan lines. He valued the rule of law, moderation, and diplomacy, but the political environment rewarded bold, clearly partisan actions. By refusing to fully align with either faction within his party, he left himself politically vulnerable. His decisions often satisfied one group only to provoke another. In a time when party loyalty was becoming increasingly decisive, this approach diminished his political strength. The growth of newspapers and public debate played a major role in shaping perceptions of Adams's presidency. Newspapers were openly partisan, and both Federalists and Democratic Republicans used the press to influence public sentiment. Stories about foreign intrigue, the XYZ affair, and the enforcement of the Alien and Sedition Acts circulated widely. The public, increasingly informed and opinionated, responded strongly. Adams's leadership style, which emphasized careful deliberation over theatrics, did not lend itself to public praise in this climate. He avoided grand speeches, public campaigns, and personal appeals, leaving others to define his image. As a result, much of the public discourse depicted him as aloof, inflexible, or authoritarian, even though these characterizations were often exaggerated. Meanwhile, Jefferson's supporters used newspapers to portray their candidate as a defender of liberty and states' rights. This contrast created a powerful narrative for voters. Adams, associated with restrictive laws and partisan conflict, versus Jefferson, positioned as the champion of freedom and popular representation. While Adams's diplomacy ultimately prevented a full-scale war with France, his foreign policy choices contributed to political vulnerabilities. His avoidance of war frustrated Federalist hawks who demanded decisive action. His negotiation of the Convention of 1800, though historically wise, was not immediately celebrated by many in the Federalist ranks. They viewed his actions as a concession to the French and a weakening of American power. At the same time, Democratic Republicans did not fully credit Adams for his successful diplomacy. They were quick to highlight earlier tensions, including the Quasi-War and the buildup of the Navy, to paint him as aggressive or inconsistent. Adams's foreign policy, therefore, satisfied neither extreme. It was too moderate for his party and too assertive for his opponents. This middle path, while effective in governance, cost him politically. Adams's personality was also a critical factor. He was intelligent, principled, and deeply committed to public service, but he was not naturally charismatic. Unlike Jefferson, Hamilton, or Washington, he lacked an ability to charm or persuade large crowds. Adams was serious, often blunt, and could come across as stubborn or argumentative. These traits made it difficult for him to connect with voters, especially when compared to Jefferson's more personable and accessible style. His moral integrity sometimes clashed with political expediency. Adams was unwilling to compromise on what he believed were core principles, even when doing so would have secured him political support. While this independence is celebrated by historians, it limited his ability to build and maintain the alliances necessary for re-election. The timing of Adams's presidency also played a role in his single-term status. He was president during a transitional period in American history. The nation was shifting from a system dominated by personalities and local alliances to one increasingly shaped by organized parties, mass media, and regional politics. Adams, trained in the earlier era of founding statesmanship, faced new political realities that did not reward moderation or caution. Additionally, his term coincided with intense domestic debates over liberty, federal power, and national security. These debates were amplified by the Quasi-War and the Alien and Sedition Acts, placing him in a constant position of scrutiny. His inability to fully align with either party faction, coupled with the intensity of public opinion, left him vulnerable to being outmaneuvered in the election. Finally, the mechanics of the Electoral College contributed to Adams's defeat. The Federalist split and the regional distribution of votes worked against him. Even if he had majority support in key areas like New England, the overall national coalition required to secure re-election was fractured. Jefferson's strong support in the South and West, combined with Federalist disunity, allowed him to win the presidency despite Adams's strengths and accomplishments. Adams's loss illustrated a critical lesson in early American politics. Success in office did not guarantee re-election. Political skill, party unity, public perception, and regional coalitions were all essential. Adams had many achievements, but the combination of divided party support, unpopular legislation, partisan attacks, and regional disparities prevented him from building the coalition needed for a second term. One of the most important reasons Adams became the first one-term president was the active opposition he faced from within his own party. Alexander Hamilton, who had once worked alongside Adams during Washington's administration, increasingly undermined him. Hamilton disagreed with Adams on critical issues such as the Quasi-War and the approach to France. When Adams pursued peace, Hamilton interpreted it as a sign of weakness. Hamilton's influence extended beyond private opinions. He communicated with Federalist leaders, pushing them to distance themselves from Adams. Hamilton even drafted memos and letters critical of the president's policies, some of which eventually became public. These internal attacks made it nearly impossible for Adams to present a unified party platform. Federalists who might have supported Adams found themselves hesitant or openly critical. The party's fractured state ensured that Adams entered the 1800 election politically weakened. The election of 1800 was highly contentious. Campaign tactics were far less formalized than modern elections, yet they were intensely personal. Newspapers, pamphlets, and local political clubs shaped public opinion. Democratic Republicans skillfully attacked Adams on multiple fronts: the Alien and Sedition Acts, the perceived authoritarianism of his administration, and the sense that he was disconnected from the public. These attacks were amplified by Federalist infighting, leaving Adams with little room to defend himself politically. Adams's own reluctance to engage in aggressive campaigning further disadvantaged him. He did not personally travel to rally support, give speeches, or directly appeal to voters, a common approach at the time. Instead, he relied on Federalist leaders and newspapers to make his case. When those leaders were divided or critical, his message was diluted. Jefferson's campaign, by contrast, presented a united front that resonated with voters across multiple regions. Adams's careful, principled approach to governance did not translate into electoral advantage. Policy decisions during Adams's presidency, though often wise from a governance standpoint, contributed to his political vulnerability. The Alien and Sedition Acts alienated immigrants and dissenters. The Federalist Party's strong alignment with these laws made Adams appear complicit in limiting civil liberties. While Adams personally opposed harsh enforcement in some cases, the public largely associated the policies with his administration. Similarly, Adams's cautious foreign policy, including the negotiation of peace with France, failed to satisfy the hawkish Federalist faction. While it protected the country from war and economic hardship, it angered party members who wanted a more aggressive approach. This combination of perceived authoritarianism and diplomatic weakness created a difficult political position. Adams was attacked from all sides, leaving him little support to secure a second term. Regional politics played a crucial role in Adams's electoral defeat. New England remained loyal, but the Federalist base there was not enough to win the presidency. The South and West, critical regions for electoral success, leaned heavily toward Jefferson and the Democratic Republicans. Adams's policies and personality did not resonate in these regions, limiting his ability to build a broad coalition. This regional imbalance illustrates a fundamental challenge for early presidents. National elections required careful attention to diverse interests. Adams had the misfortune of having strong support concentrated in a small portion of the country while losing traction in rapidly growing regions. Jefferson's regional advantage, combined with Adams's internal party struggles, made the outcome almost inevitable. Adams's presidency also highlights the dangers of early American partisanship. Political parties were still new, and loyalty was fluid. Adams's independent style, which prioritized principle over party unity, left him vulnerable to internal sabotage. His inability to navigate party dynamics effectively is one of the main reasons he became the first president to serve only one term. At the same time, the election of 1800 demonstrated the emerging power of organized opposition. Democratic Republicans successfully leveraged public opinion, regional support, and party loyalty to achieve victory. Adams's failure was not due to incompetence or policy mistakes alone, it was also a result of the changing political landscape, which demanded more strategic party coordination and public engagement than he was willing or able to provide. Historians have debated Adams's single-term presidency for centuries. Many conclude that he was a competent and principled leader whose accomplishments were overshadowed by party divisions, unpopular legislation, and political misperceptions. The peace with France, avoidance of a costly war, and dedication to the rule of law are often cited as high points of his tenure. Yet Adams's presidency also serves as a cautionary tale about the intersection of principle and politics. His commitment to moderation, honesty, and prudence conflicted with a political environment increasingly dominated by partisanship and public opinion. In practical terms, this left him politically vulnerable. He achieved historic successes but paid the price at the ballot box. John Adams's status as America's first one-term president is not simply a matter of political failure. It is the result of a complex interplay of party politics, regional divides, public opinion, and personal leadership style. His experience demonstrates that in early American politics, even competent and principled leaders were vulnerable to the pressures of partisanship and the rapidly evolving electoral system. In the final analysis, Adams's presidency can be seen as both a success and a warning. He preserved national stability, avoided war, and demonstrated moral courage. Yet his inability to secure a second term illustrates the political costs of independence in a highly partisan and regionally divided nation. Understanding these factors provides insight not only into Adams himself but into the broader dynamics of early American governance and the challenges of leading a young, divided country. John Adams's experience as the first one-term president provides a rich case study in leadership, politics, and the challenges of governing a young nation. While his presidency had notable accomplishments, it also revealed the fragile balance between principle, party politics, and public opinion. By analyzing Adams's successes and setbacks, modern audiences can gain insight into the factors that influence political outcomes and the enduring lessons of early American governance. One of the clearest lessons from Adams's presidency is the critical role of party unity. Despite being the Federalist Party's candidate, Adams never fully commanded the loyalty of all Federalist leaders. Alexander Hamilton's opposition and the divided cabinet created obstacles that weakened the president politically. Adams's attempts to govern independently of factional pressures were admirable in principle, but ultimately left him vulnerable to attacks from within his own party. The lesson is clear. Even highly capable leaders must maintain strong relationships with their political allies. In Adams's case, failure to manage these internal divisions allowed his opponents to exploit weaknesses, which contributed significantly to his loss in the election of 1800. Party unity, while not a guarantee of success, is often essential for implementing policy and securing electoral victories. Adams's presidency illustrates the tension between moral principle and political strategy. He consistently acted according to his beliefs, prioritizing national interest over personal or partisan gain. His decision to pursue peace with France during the Quasi-War is a prime example. Adams understood that war would be costly and potentially disastrous for the young nation. Yet this pragmatic and moral choice alienated many hardline Federalists, leaving him politically exposed. The lesson here is that principled decisions can sometimes clash with political expediency. Effective leaders must find a way to balance ethics and practicality. Adams's failure to fully anticipate the political repercussions of his choices contributed to his one-term status, even though his decisions were correct from a national interest standpoint. Another key takeaway from Adams's presidency is the growing influence of public opinion and media. Partisan newspapers played a major role in shaping the public's perception of the president. The Alien and Sedition Acts, the XYZ affair, and other controversies were magnified by newspapers that framed events in ways favorable to their respective parties. Adams's careful and deliberate approach often failed to resonate with a public increasingly influenced by rhetoric and partisan messaging. Leaders must recognize the power of perception. Even when decisions are wise or just, failure to communicate effectively with the public can result in political backlash. Adams's experience demonstrates that governance is not only about making the right choices but also about ensuring that those choices are understood and accepted by the electorate. Adams's handling of foreign affairs offers important lessons in diplomacy and risk management. By avoiding full-scale war with France, he preserved the country's resources and maintained national stability. His decision to send a second diplomatic mission, despite opposition from his own party, reflects strategic thinking and foresight. The lesson is that foreign policy decisions often carry domestic political risks. Leaders must balance international strategy with the expectations of political allies and the electorate. Adams's example shows that prudence in foreign policy may be unpopular at the moment but can prevent long-term crises. Diplomacy, careful negotiation, and restraint are often more effective than aggressive military action, even if they come at a short-term political cost. Adams's personal traits, principled, serious, sometimes rigid, shaped both his successes and failures. His commitment to duty, integrity, and law helped him navigate crises like the XYZ affair and the Quasi-War. Yet his temperament also limited his ability to connect with the public and manage political allies. Unlike charismatic leaders such as Jefferson or Washington, Adams struggled to inspire enthusiasm or rally broad-based support. The lesson is that leadership requires both competence and interpersonal skill. Policy achievements alone are not enough to secure re-election or lasting influence. Adams's presidency demonstrates that even a capable and ethical leader can be politically vulnerable if personal style does not align with the demands of public perception and party politics. Adams's presidency also highlights the dangers of controversial domestic policies. The Alien and Sedition Acts, while intended to protect national security, became a focal point of criticism. These laws were seen as infringing on civil liberties, restricting free speech, and targeting political opponents. Although Adams did not aggressively enforce the laws, his association with them created lasting damage to his reputation. The lesson is that leaders must carefully consider the long-term political consequences of legislation. Policies that appear necessary from a security or administrative standpoint can backfire if the public perceives them as unjust or oppressive. Adams's experience demonstrates that even well-intentioned laws can have profound political costs if they are unpopular or seem to violate fundamental principles. Timing played a critical role in Adams's political fortunes. Decisions such as pursuing peace with France or signing the Alien and Sedition Acts were made in response to immediate pressures. While strategically sound, these actions often had delayed or unintended political consequences. By the time the positive effects of his diplomacy were felt, negative perceptions of his domestic policies had already taken root. The lesson is that timing matters in leadership. Leaders must not only make correct decisions but also anticipate the sequence of political and public reactions. Even effective policies can become liabilities if they coincide with other unpopular measures or if their benefits are not immediately visible. Adams's struggles with Hamilton and other Federalist leaders underscore the importance of managing internal rivalries. Effective leadership requires not only public approval but also cohesion within one's own party. Adams's failure to reconcile differences within the Federalists allowed internal criticism to weaken his authority and reduce electoral support. The lesson here is that managing internal conflicts is essential for political survival. Leaders must balance principle with diplomacy to maintain loyalty among allies. Adams's inability to align his party behind his leadership decisions left him exposed to attacks that ultimately contributed to his one-term status. Adams's presidency demonstrates the need for clear communication with both the public and party members. His cautious and formal style, while principled, sometimes led to misunderstandings about his intentions. Partisan newspapers and political opponents exploited this ambiguity to shape negative narratives about his leadership. The lesson is that effective leaders must communicate not only what they do but also why they do it. Transparency and clarity can help prevent misinterpretation and reduce the impact of partisan attacks. Adams's experience shows that even when a leader acts correctly, lack of effective communication can significantly weaken political support. Finally, Adams's experience provides lessons about resilience and the long-term impact of political defeat. Despite losing the presidency, Adams continued to serve the nation through writing, correspondence, and guidance to future leaders. He maintained dignity and reflected thoughtfully on his term, offering insights into governance, diplomacy, and leadership. The lesson is that political defeat does not erase the value of service or diminish the importance of achievements. Adams's presidency, though brief, left a lasting legacy in both domestic and foreign policy. His example shows that even setbacks can provide opportunities for reflection, growth, and continued contribution to public life. Modern leaders can learn much from Adams's one-term presidency. The challenges he faced, party division, media influence, public perception, and balancing principle with politics, are still relevant today. The need to navigate internal party dynamics, communicate effectively, and make principled decisions while maintaining public support are enduring challenges in any democratic system. Adams's experience reminds leaders that even when policies are correct and intentions are sound, political survival requires strategy, coalition building, and careful attention to perception. His presidency serves as a case study in both the successes and pitfalls of leadership under complex conditions. John Adams's presidency, though brief, left a lasting mark on American history. As the second president of the United States and the first to serve only one term, he faced challenges that tested his leadership, principles, and political skill. Despite a turbulent political environment, Adams achieved notable successes. His careful handling of international tensions with France, particularly during the Quasi-War, prevented full-scale conflict and preserved the nation's stability. By negotiating the Convention of 1800, he protected American trade and avoided unnecessary war, demonstrating prudence and commitment to national interests. Domestically, he ensured that government functions continued effectively during a period when norms for executive power and federal authority were still forming. His dedication to governance, even amid criticism and partisan disputes, set important precedents for future presidents in balancing constitutional principles with practical administration. However, Adams's presidency was also marked by controversies that weakened his political standing. The Alien and Sedition Acts, enacted to protect national security, became widely criticized as infringements on civil liberties. Though Adams did not enforce them aggressively, public perception largely held him responsible, damaging his popularity. Internal divisions within the Federalist Party compounded these difficulties. Factional disputes, particularly with Alexander Hamilton, created political isolation. Even when Adams made prudent and principled decisions, he faced opposition from influential party leaders. These conflicts proved decisive in the election of 1800, contributing to his defeat by Thomas Jefferson. The election of 1800 was a turning point in American political history, demonstrating the importance of party unity, strategic planning, and regional coalition building. Adams faced a disciplined Democratic-Republican opposition and could not overcome the divisions within his own party or the controversies surrounding his policies. The campaign revealed that political skill, communication, and public perception had become central to electoral success, signaling a shift in how presidential leadership was evaluated. Adams's experience illustrates that even a capable and principled leader could be vulnerable when party cohesion and public support were lacking. Adams's presidency provides lasting lessons in leadership. His commitment to principle over popularity shows the value of integrity in governance. His cautious approach to foreign policy and efforts to avoid war demonstrate the importance of prudence and strategic thinking. At the same time, his tenure underscores the necessity of political acumen, including managing party dynamics, understanding public sentiment, and communicating effectively. Despite losing the presidency, Adams continued to influence the nation through writing, mentorship, and reflection, showing that leadership extends beyond holding office and is measured by long-term impact. Adams occupies a unique place in American history. As the first one-term president, he illustrated the risks of independent decision-making in a divided party system. His foreign policy achievements, constitutional commitment, and moral courage are widely recognized, while the challenges he faced reflect the complexities of early American politics. His presidency helped shape the role of the executive, balancing diplomacy, national security, and domestic governance. Being a one-term president highlights the fragility of political support and the importance of coalition building, demonstrating that public service often requires prioritizing national welfare over personal or partisan gain. Adams's presidency shows that historical significance is not determined solely by electoral success. His achievements in diplomacy, governance, and constitutional preservation, alongside the controversies and challenges he faced, provide enduring lessons about leadership, responsibility, and public service. His story reflects the difficulties of guiding a young nation and underscores that the true measure of leadership lies in lasting contributions, principled decisions, and the impact on future generations.